Trade deadline day in Toronto. What a fucking time to be alive, isn't it? A renewed sense of optimism here in Leaf Nation that this year, at this year's deadline, we finally got those elusive final puzzle pieces we've been looking for. We finally got them, right? Right? Okay, so regardless of what the Leafs did or did not do today, I just want to remind everybody that if it's actually going to be our year here in Toronto and the Leafs are actually going to go on a run, it really just comes down to two things. Can the core four show up and finally do what they're paid to do? And can Anthony Stolarz go on the run of his life? Because on paper, I really do think on paper, this team, does have what it takes to go the distance. And you know what? I think Brad Treliving did a pretty good fucking job today. What have we been bitching and complaining about all year here in Toronto? You got to upgrade the D and you need a third line center. He went out and did both of those things without giving up our most coveted prospect, Easton Cowan. And you got two guys that have term, which I love. They're not rentals, and they have their salary retained. Like, what else could you ask for? Brandon Carlo is a big, beefy, 6'5", 220-pound right-handed shot defenseman with a ton of playoff experience who will cross-check the shit out of anybody who comes within 12 feet of the crease. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Scott Laughton is essentially a Costco brand version of Braden Shen, who the Leafs were trying to get, but he wouldn't waive to come here. Ryan O'Reilly wouldn't also waive to come here. You got to keep that in mind. There's a lot of guys that simply don't want to come here in Toronto, so the market is more limited for Treliving in terms of who he can actually acquire. Scott Laughton, former Toronto Marlboros GTHL superstar, grew up a Leaf fan, perfect fit for the Berube structure as a third-line center. Defensively responsible, good two-way game. Little inconsistent offensively, but at the end of the day, he has more goals than half of our forward group. You ask a Flyers fan about Scott Laughton, and they'll say that he's an absolute menace, and despite the fact he's not very big, he'll throw his body at everything. That sounds great. He's also supposedly an elite locker room guy. And I still think that is a factor, something that the Leafs are lacking a little bit, is true leadership and character in the dressing room, which apparently Laughton is going to bring and then some. Now, for all the Leaf fans pissing and moaning that they gave up too much at the deadline, what are you doing? What world are you living in? You got to give up something at the deadline to get something meaningful coming back. Like, come on now. What did they really give up here? They gave up a first-rounder, top 10 protected. Anything outside of the top 10 is a complete crapshoot. Like, all draft picks are a crapshoot. They mean nothing. Almost all of them end up being nothing, okay? You give up Fraser Minton. Yeah, he's going to blossom into a pretty good player. But, let's call a spade here. He lacks the offensive upside. And I don't see Fraser Minton as someone who's going to be really moving the needle inside this Leafs lineup in the next 3 to 4 years, which is what their cup window is. If anything, I'm more sour about losing Grebenkin, who has the personality and playing style that we so desperately crave here in Toronto and don't have. But again, another guy with limited offensive upside. And honestly, other than the hits and the fighting, I thought he looked pretty lost in the regular season and preseason games he played with us. Again, another guy, similar to Minton, that is not going to be making a significant contribution in the next 3 to 5 years. So who gives a shit that we gave him up? Now, the last thing I'll say here is that if there was anything that put a bit of a damper on the day today, it was watching the Florida Panthers acquire Brad Marchand. Like, just as we see the Bruins' downfall happening before our eyes, and we think, great, we're never going to have to see the Rat ever again in a playoff series. He goes to our division rival. And it's terrifying to think of that roster that Florida is going to be rolling out, come playoff time. And the Leafs better win the division. That's all I can say. They better fucking scratch and claw and find a way to win the division and avoid having to play Florida or Tampa in that first round. If you watch this video all the way to the end, thank you for still being here. You must be a true Leaf fan and really think it's our year like me. Drop a comment, let me know what your thoughts are, and go Leafs, go!